My older brother, a chef, left me with a six-figure debt after his restaurant failed, calling me naive for ever trusting him. He thought he'd gotten away with it, secretly opening a new restaurant with fresh funding. He didn't know his greatest critic was his own sister. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The call came on a Tuesday. I was in the middle of a tasting, dissecting a plate of seared scallops with parsnip puree. The phone buzzed against the starched white tablecloth, an insistent, angry vibration. It was Mr. Henderson from Sterling National Bank. His voice was stripped of its usual courtesy, thin and tight like a wire. "Miss Vance, Clara, I'm afraid we have a serious problem." I excused myself from the table, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The restaurant's opulent decor, the velvet chairs, the gilded mirrors, seemed to mock me as I hurried to a quiet corner. I already knew what this was about. For months, I had been pouring my savings into the gaping maw of my brother's debt, a futile attempt to keep the beast at bay. "It's about the loan for Ember," Mr. Henderson said, his words clipped. "Julian has formally filed for business bankruptcy. The petition was approved this morning." I leaned against the cool marble wall, the phone slippery in my hand. Bankruptcy, but he said he was working it out with the vendors. A dry, humorless sound came through the line. "The business is bankrupt, Miss Vance. Not him, personally. The corporation is dissolved. As the sole cosigner and guarantor on the loan, the outstanding balance of $240,000 is now your full responsibility. Payments are already in arrears. We need a plan of action immediately." $240,000. The number echoed in the sudden, roaring silence of my mind. It was an impossible sum, a life-altering anchor that would drag me to the bottom of an ocean I couldn't even see. The scallops I had just tasted turned to ash in my mouth. I tried to call Julian. The first time, it went to voicemail. His voice, once a sound of comfort and shared childhood memories, was now slick and cheerful. "You've reached Julian. Can't get to the phone. Leave a message." The second, third, and fourth calls went straight to voicemail. He was screening me. He knew the bank would be calling. Finally, on my seventh attempt, he picked up. There was noise in the background, clatter, laughter, the unmistakable energy of a busy place. "Clara, now is not a good time," he said, his voice strained with annoyance. Not a good time? My own voice was a stranger's, thin and incredulous. "The bank just called me, Julian. They said you declared bankruptcy. They said I owe them nearly $250,000. A heavy sigh on his end. It was the sound of a man burdened not by debt, but by the inconvenience of having to explain himself. Look, it was a business decision. Ember wasn't working. The numbers weren't there. I had to cut my losses." "Cut your losses?" I choked out a laugh that was more like a sob. "You didn't cut your losses, Julian. You transferred them directly to me. This will ruin me. How could you do this?" His response came back, cold and sharp, each word a perfectly honed little knife. "Honestly, Clara, you were just naive to trust me. It's business. You signed the papers. You knew the risks." And then he hung up. I stood there in the hushed corridor of a 3-Michelin-star restaurant, the world tilting on its axis. Naive. He had used my love for him, my belief in him, against me, and then branded me a fool for it. He had taken my future and lit it on fire to warm his hands while he walked away. The betrayal was so absolute, so profound, it eclipsed the terrifying reality of the debt itself. The pain of my brother's final words cut deeper than any surgeon's scalpel. The first few weeks were a blur of shame and panic. I met with Mr. Henderson, my face burning as he laid out the grim reality. My salary, while respectable for a journalist, was no match for a debt of this magnitude. We worked out a payment plan that would consume more than half of my income for the foreseeable future. My dreams of buying my own apartment, of traveling, of simply having a cushion of security, they all evaporated. I sold my car and moved into a smaller, cheaper apartment in a less desirable part of the city. My life, once a source of pride, was now a spreadsheet of austerity. I tried to reach out to our parents, but they were retired and living on a fixed income. Explaining that their perfect son had deliberately ruined their daughter was a conversation I couldn't bring myself to have, so I bore it alone. The weight of the secret was almost as heavy as the debt itself. 2 months after the bankrupt, Julian finally resurfaced. He called me, his tone casual as if nothing had happened. "Hey sis, long time no talk. How are you holding up?" he asked, a false brightness in his voice. I was standing in my new, cramped kitchen, staring at a stack of bills. "How do you think I'm holding up, Julian?" I said, my voice flat. "I'm working 2 freelance jobs on top of my column just to make the payments on your loan." "Right that," he said dismissively. "Listen, I feel bad about how that all went down. I want to make it up to you. Let me take you out to dinner. There's a new place I want to check out." Against my better judgment, I agreed. A part of me, a small, foolish part, hoped he was going to apologize, that he would present a plan to help, to take responsibility. We met at a sleek, minimalist bistro downtown. He looked fantastic. He wore a tailored blazer over a crisp t-shirt, his hair was perfectly styled, and he had a glow of success about him that made my stomach churn. He talked about his new life, his new friends, a new project he was excited about. He never once mentioned the debt. As the waiter brought our entrees, I couldn't take it anymore. "Julian, we need to talk about the money." He put his fork down and adopted a look of pained patience. "Clara, I told you, my hands are tied. The bankruptcy court, the lawyers, it's all very complicated. I can't legally give you money for that debt, even if I had it." "Even if you had it?" I stared at his designer watch, the expensive leather of his shoes. "You seem to be doing all right for yourself." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I got lucky, met some people who believe in my vision. I'm consulting for a restaurant group now. It's a fresh start." He looked at me, his eyes searching my face, and for a moment I saw the brother I used to know. Then the mask slipped back into place. He reached across the table and patted my hand, a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt utterly condescending. "You're strong, Clara. You'll get through this. You've always been the responsible one." His words, meant to sound like a compliment, were an admission of his own irresponsibility. He was counting on my strength to clean up his mess. As I sat there, watching him wax poetic about flavor profiles and culinary trends, a cold, hard thought began to form in my mind, a tiny, sharp crystal of an idea. He thought I was just his naive little sister, the writer, the one who lived in a world of words and not consequences. But he had forgotten who I was before I was just his sister. He had forgotten what I did for a living. He had forgotten that my words had power. That single thought, that tiny crystal, was something I would hold on to. It was a promise to myself that this was not over. Julian had always been the golden child. I was the quiet, studious one, while he was the charismatic star, the one who could charm anyone into doing anything. Our parents adored him. When he announced at age 19 that he was dropping out of business school to become a chef, they weren't disappointed, they were thrilled. They saw a future visionary, a Wolfgang Puck in the making. I was his biggest supporter. When he needed money for culinary school in France, I emptied my college savings account without a second thought. When he returned, full of grand ideas and a bigger ego, I helped him write business plans, edited his menus, and used my growing network as a budding food journalist to talk him up to anyone who would listen. He was my big brother, my hero. His dream was my dream. The plan for Ember was his masterpiece. It was going to be a temple of modern American cuisine, a monument to his genius. He found the perfect location, a beautiful corner spot with floor-to-ceiling windows. The only problem was the cost. No bank would give him the full amount on his own. He had no assets, no credit history to speak of. That's when he came to me. He sat in my sunny, spacious apartment, the one I would soon have to give up, and laid out his vision. He spoke of legacy, of family, of building something together. "This isn't just for me, Clara," he'd said, his eyes shining with sincerity. "This is for us, for the Vance name. You're the only one I trust. With your support, it's a guaranteed success. We'll be rich." He made it sound like an honor, a privilege to be part of his journey. My logical mind, the part of me that analyzed contracts and understood risk, screamed in protest. But the part of me that was a little sister, the part that had always looked up to him, won out. I signed the papers. His charm was his greatest asset and his most dangerous weapon. He used it to get what he wanted, but it masked a deep, startling lack of integrity. With Ember, he spent lavishly on the things that could be seen: the Italian marble bar, the custom-made light fixtures, the expensive PR firm, but cut corners on everything else. He was chronically paying suppliers. He treated his kitchen staff poorly, leading to high turnover. He was a brilliant marketer, a terrible manager. The restaurant was a beautiful, hollow shell, and it imploded in less than a year. The person who had influenced him most, who had poured gasoline on the fire of his worst impulses, was his new girlfriend, a woman named Vanessa. She was a wealth manager for an opaque boutique firm, a woman who wore her ambition like a designer handbag. She saw Julian not as a partner, but as an asset to be leveraged. I met her only a few times before the collapse of Ember, but her impact was obvious. She spoke of branding and monetization, and her eyes lit up whenever Julian discussed the restaurant's press coverage, which I had helped secure. She was polished, sharp, and had a smile that never quite reached her eyes. I suspected she was the secret investor behind his new life. She had the connections and the cold-blooded calculus to see his bankruptcy not as a failure, but as a strategic shedding of inconvenient debt, and of me. Julian, in his arrogance, was blind to the fact that he was just a pawn in her game. He thought he was starting fresh, but he had simply traded one set of obligations for another, far more dangerous one. He wasn't a visionary, he was a product, and Vanessa was his new brand manager. The whole arrangement reeked of deception, and the more I thought about it, the more the cold crystal of my resolve began to sharpen into a weapon. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I was sitting at my desk, staring at a blank page, trying to summon the enthusiasm to write a fluffy piece about the city's best new bakeries. My phone buzzed with a payment reminder from the bank. A wave of helpless anger washed over me. I felt like I was drowning, and my own brother was standing on the shore, watching. I pushed my keyboard away, stood up, and walked to my bookshelf. I pulled out a worn copy of The Professional Chef. It was a gift from Julian, years ago, after I'd written my first paid article. Inside the cover, he'd written, "To Clara, my favorite critic. Can't wait to give you something worth writing about. Your biggest fan, Julian." My biggest fan? The irony was so bitter it made my throat ache. I looked at the inscription, at the ghost of the brother I thought I had. That's when the anger solidified into something else. It was no longer a hot, messy emotion, but a cold, clear purpose. He wanted to give me something worth writing about? Fine. I would give him a review he would never forget. The next morning, I walked into the office of my editor, Marcus. Marcus was a legend in the industry, a sharp, no-nonsense journalist with an almost religious devotion to the truth. He had been my mentor for years. "Morning, Marcus," I said, placing a coffee on his cluttered desk. "Clara," he grunted, not looking up from a manuscript. "What's on your mind? Don't tell me another cupcake place has opened up." "Something bigger," I said. "Have you heard of a new restaurant called Oralia? It's getting a lot of buzz online. Soft opening was last week." He finally looked up, his interest piqued. "Oralia, in the old Belmont building?" Heard whispers. "Supposed to be some hotshot chef, very exclusive, very expensive. Why?" "I want to review it," I said, my voice steady. "I want the cover of the Sunday magazine. I think there's a real story there." He studied me for a long moment, his gaze perceptive. He knew my work. I was known for thoughtful, balanced reviews, not for chasing hyped-up new openings. This was a departure for me. "This is more than just a review, isn't it?" he asked. I took a breath. "It is, but I can't tell you the full story until it's done. All I can ask is that you trust me. I will be impartial. I will be factual. Every word will be verifiable. And it will be the most important review I've ever written." Marcus leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against his chin. He had always valued my integrity. He saw the fire in my eyes, and it was the fire of a journalist on the hunt for a story, not a woman seeking simple revenge. "All right, Clara," he said slowly. "You've got the cover. Don't make me regret this." The investigation began that night. Oralia was not yet open to the public, operating on a reservations-only basis for a curated list of influencers and city elites. Getting a table was my first challenge. I didn't use my name. Instead, I had a friend make a reservation under a pseudonym. My first visit was purely observational. I sat at the bar, nursing a glass of wine, and simply watched. The restaurant was stunning, even more opulent than Ember. It was all dark woods, brushed gold, and dramatic lighting. And there, in the center of the open kitchen, was Julian. He moved with a theatrical grace, calling out orders, a confident king in his new castle. Watching him, so proud and unbothered, while I was secretly selling my possessions to pay. For his last failure was sickening. But a critic's job is to see past the performance. I started taking notes. The staff seemed tense, their smiles brittle. I overheard a busboy being viciously berated by a manager for dropping a fork. I saw a waiter pocket a cash tip that was clearly meant for the whole team. The beautiful facade was already showing cracks. My trap was my method. I would not rely on subjective taste alone. I would build a case, brick by brick, based on indisputable facts. Over the next few weeks, I became a ghost haunting the periphery of Julian's new life. I spoke to food suppliers and discovered that Oralia, like Ember before it, was already slow to pay its bills. I interviewed 2 line cooks who had quit after just 1 week, citing a toxic work environment and Julian's explosive temper. I learned from a contact at the health department that they had received an anonymous tip-off about improper food storage, though nothing had been proven yet. The most damning discovery came from a conversation with a farmer at the Union Square Green Market. Oralia's menu boasted of its farm-to-table ethos, listing specific farms as its partners. When I spoke to the owner of one of those farms, he laughed. "Oralia, the chef, came by once, bought a few baskets of tomatoes for a photo op, and we never saw him again," the farmer told me, wiping his hands on his apron. "But my name is still on his menu. Funny, isn't it?" It wasn't funny, it was fraud. Julian wasn't just cutting corners, he was selling a complete fabrication. He was a con artist disguised as a chef, and I had every single receipt. The second time I went to Oralia, I dined alone at a small table in the corner, armed with my knowledge. The experience was like watching a film for the second time, suddenly aware of all the tricks and illusions. The warmth of the host felt calculated. The waiter's elaborate descriptions of the dishes, which I now knew were based on lies, sounded like a poorly rehearsed script. Julian was working the floor that night, schmoozing with the wealthy patrons. He didn't see me at first, tucked away in the shadows. I watched him laugh, accepting compliments, his face glowing with fraudulent pride. He was selling a story, and this entire restaurant was his stage. I ordered the 5-course tasting menu, the one that showcased the full range of his supposed genius. Each dish that arrived was a testament to his true nature. All style, no substance. The hand-foraged mushroom risotto used standard cremini mushrooms, not the chanterelles promised on the menu. The risotto itself was undercooked, the rice still chalky at its core, a cardinal sin for any chef. The heritage pork with heirloom carrots featured a tough, overcooked piece of pork, and the carrots were pale, uniform imposters, clearly from a commercial supplier, not the vibrant, irregular jewels a true heirloom variety would be. He was building his empire on a foundation of lies, and I was documenting every single one. The entire meal was a performance of mediocrity masquerading as excellence. He was relying on the fact that his clientele was more interested in being seen at the city's hottest new restaurant than in the actual quality of the food. They were eating the price tag, not the meal. He finally spotted me as the dessert course was being cleared. His smile froze on his face. He excused himself from the table he was fawning over and made his way toward me, his expression a mixture of shock and suspicion. "Clara," he said, his voice a low, tense murmur, "what are you doing here?" I looked up at him, my expression neutral. "I'm having dinner, Julian. Is that a problem?" "You should have told me you were coming. I would have taken care of you." "You mean you would have made sure my meal was perfect, unlike the meals served to the regular customers?" I asked, my voice soft but pointed. His eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "The risotto was undercooked. The pork was tough. And the carrots—" "Tell me, which farm did you say these heirloom carrots were from again? I spoke to Farmer McGregor last week. He said he hasn't heard from you in months." Color drained from his face. For a fleeting second, I saw pure panic in his eyes. He quickly masked it with anger. "You have no right," he hissed, leaning closer. "You're not welcome here. You're trying to sabotage me." "I'm not trying to do anything, Julian," I replied calmly, placing my napkin on the table. "I'm a food critic. This is my job. You, of all people, should know that." I paused, letting the words hang in the air between us. "You once told me you couldn't wait to give me something worth writing about." I stood up, my gaze unwavering. "Congratulations, you finally have." I walked out of the restaurant, leaving him standing there, speechless and pale, in the middle of his glittering, hollow kingdom. The confrontation wasn't loud or explosive, but it was devastating. I had revealed my hand. He now knew I wasn't just his broken-hearted little sister anymore. I was a critic. I had found the truth, and a clock was now ticking on his career. The fear in his eyes was my confirmation. The trap was set. The encounter at Oralia lit a fire under Julian. The next day, I received a fumbling, vaguely threatening voicemail from him. "Stay away from my restaurant, Clara. You don't know who you're messing with. These are serious people." It was a desperate bluff, and it only strengthened my resolve. He wasn't worried about serious people. He was worried about the truth. My investigation intensified. I was no longer just a critic assessing a meal. I was an investigative journalist building an airtight case. Marcus, my editor, sensing the magnitude of the story, gave me his full backing. He assigned a fact-checker to my team, a meticulous man named Ben who treated every claim like a potential lawsuit. We dug deeper. I learned the name of Julian's secret investor, Vanessa's father, a ruthless real estate developer with a reputation for shady dealings. Julian wasn't a partner. He was an employee, a celebrity chef hired to be the face of their latest luxury project. If the restaurant failed, Julian would be cut loose without a second thought, but the developer would have established a high-end property in a prime location. Julian thought he was building his own brand, but he was just disposable talent. The human cost of his ambition became painfully clear. I tracked down a young pastry chef Julian had fired from Oralia. We met for coffee, and she told me, through tears, how he had stolen her signature dessert recipe, a lavender and honey entremet, and passed it off as his own on the new menu. "He told me I was nobody," she said, her voice trembling with indignation. "He said no one would ever believe me over him." I recorded her story, got a copy of her original, dated concept sketches for the dessert, and had Ben verify her previous employment. Another brick in the wall of my exposé. Next, I staked out the restaurant's back alley early one morning. I watched as a generic, low-budget food supply truck made a delivery. The boxes were labeled with a budget wholesaler's logo, the kind that supplies cheap diners and hospital cafeterias. A few hours later, a van from a high-end organic farm would pull up, unload a few photogenic crates of vegetables for show, and then leave. It was a carefully orchestrated deception. The case was becoming bigger than my personal betrayal. It was about journalistic integrity. It was about giving a voice to the farmers, the suppliers, and the young chefs Julian had cheated and bullied. My personal pain was the fuel, but the story itself was the fire, and it was about to consume him. I compiled everything into a thick dossier. Financial records from Ember's bankruptcy, sworn statements from former employees, photographs of the back alley deliveries, the evidence of recipe theft, the lies on the menu. It was a mountain of irrefutable proof. My final visit to Orlaya was with a photographer. We dined under the same pseudonym. This time, the service was cloyingly attentive. Julian had clearly warned his staff about me. He watched me from the kitchen all night, his face a mask of anxiety. It didn't matter. The photographer discreetly captured images of the disappointing dishes, the tense atmosphere, the cavernous, half-empty dining room on a Friday night, a death knell for a supposedly hot, new restaurant. The evening ended with a second confrontation, this time initiated by him. As we were leaving, he cornered me by the coat check, his voice a venomous whisper. "I know what you're doing," he snarled. "You're trying to ruin me because you're bitter. You were always jealous of my talent." I looked at him, not with anger, but with a kind of weary pity. "No, Julian, I was never jealous of your talent. I was your biggest admirer. You're confusing bitterness with integrity. They're very different things. You should try looking one of them up." I turned and walked away, leaving him to stew in the toxic narrative he had created for himself. He had no idea what was coming. The case was built, the evidence was logged, and the story was written. All that was left was to publish it. The Sunday edition of the Times magazine hit the newsstands, and the internet at 6 a.m. My story was the cover feature. The headline, chosen by Marcus, was stark and brutal. Aurelia, a recipe for deception. But it was the smaller details that were designed for an audience of one. The byline read, "By Clara Vance," and next to it, where a stock author photo would normally be, was a professional headshot of me, looking directly at the reader, my expression calm and resolute. There would be no doubt in his mind. I didn't just write a bad review, I systematically dismantled his entire operation. I structured the article like a legal argument, presenting evidence piece by piece. I began with H. The food, the tangible failure on the plate. The hand-foraged mushroom risotto, $38, I wrote, is an object lesson in broken promises. The chanterelles described on the menu failed to appear, replaced by common cremini mushrooms. The risotto itself, a dish that demands patience and precision, was rushed and gritty, a culinary crime at any price point. It is a dish that tastes of contempt for the diner. From there, I broadened the scope, moving from the plate to the philosophy. Orlaya sells a story of farm-to-table integrity, yet interviews with the very farmers listed on its menu reveal a different tale. One, a respected grower from the Hudson Valley, confirmed he sold the restaurant a few vegetables for a photo op and has not done business with them since. The heritage pork is sourced not from a small family farm, but from a mass-market commercial supplier. This is not a partnership with local artisans. It is the cynical appropriation of their good names. I wove in the human stories, the stolen recipe from the young pastry chef, the accounts of mistreated staff. I laid out the evidence of his financial deceptions, linking the spectacular failure of Ember to the smoke and mirrors funding of Orlaya. I never mentioned he was my brother. I didn't have to. The facts were more damning than any personal accusation. I concluded the review with a final, devastating paragraph, awarding the restaurant a rating it had never before given in its history: 0 stars. A restaurant can be forgiven for a bad dish, an off night, or even failed ambition. What cannot be forgiven is a fundamental lack of integrity. Orlaya is more than a bad restaurant. It is a meticulously constructed lie from foundation to rooftop. It is a monument to cynicism, built on a bedrock of deceit. It is, in the end, nothing. I spent that Sunday at home, my phone turned off. I knew the fallout would be immediate and spectacular. By noon, the review was trending on social media. Other news outlets were picking it up. The phrase 0 stars was everywhere. The call came just after 6 p.m. I had turned my phone back on, prepared. The caller ID simply said, "Julian." I let it ring 3 times, then answered and put it on speaker. A torrent of rage erupted from the phone. He was screaming, incoherent with fury. "You ruined me. You destroyed me. How could you do this to your own brother? I waited for him to pause for breath, then spoke, my voice devoid of emotion. I didn't do this, Julian. You did. I just wrote it down. You used your job to attack me. It's a personal vendetta, he yelled. No, I replied, the word as cold and hard as steel. It's a professional review. Every single word in that article is true and has been fact-checked. I gave you the courtesy of treating you like any other chef. The result is on you. My investors, they're pulling out. Vanessa's father is suing me for breach of contract. I'm finished, he cried, his voice now cracking with desperation. My career is over. I thought of the crushing weight of the debt, of the sleepless nights, of the shame. I thought of him calling me naive. You called me naive for trusting you with my future, I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the line with absolute finality. Perhaps the real naivete was in you thinking I would just quietly pay for your mistakes and let you build a new life on a fresh set of lies. You wanted something worth writing about. I hope you're proud. There was a long, choked silence on the other end, and then I did something I hadn't done in months. I hung up on him. The click of the disconnected call was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The days following the review were a whirlwind. The story became a sensation, a topic of conversation on morning shows and in culinary blogs across the country. Orlia closed its doors less than a week after the article was published. The for lease sign went up a few days after that. Vanessa and her father cut Julian loose, their brief and profitable alliance dissolved. He was left with nothing but a tarnished reputation from which he would likely never recover. My editor, Marcus, called me into his office. He had a copy of the magazine on his desk. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. I got a call from Julian Vance's lawyer, he said, threatening to sue us for defamation. My heart skipped a beat, and Marcus smiled, a rare and genuine expression. And I told him to look up the definition of truth in the dictionary, then read our 3-inch thick file of supporting evidence, and then call me back. He hasn't called back. He pushed the magazine across the desk. This, Clara, is what journalism is all about. It's the best work you've ever done. The praise from him, a man I respected so deeply, felt like a validation far more profound than any revenge. I hadn't just settled a personal score. I had done my job with unwavering integrity. A month later, I walked back in to Sterling National Bank for a scheduled meeting with Mr. Henderson. I had continued to make my punishing payments every month. I sat down across from him, my shoulders straight. Mr. Henderson, I began, I came to you a while ago in a great deal of distress. I want to thank you for your patience. I have been working on a solution to handle the outstanding debt. Before he could respond, I slid a check across the table. It was a cashier's check from my publisher. They had given me a significant advance to turn my experience and my investigative work on restaurant fraud into a book. The advance was large enough to pay off the entire remaining balance of Julian's loan in one single, glorious transaction. Mr. Henderson picked up the check, his eyes wide. He looked from the check to my face and back again. A slow smile spread across his face. Miss Vance, I read your article. It was remarkable. Thank you, I said, feeling a weight lift from my soul that I hadn't even realized was still there. I believe this settles my account. I never heard from Julian again. I heard through the family grapevine that he had moved away, somewhere to the Midwest, taking a job as a line cook in a chain hotel. Our parents were heartbroken, confused by the public implosion of their golden boy, but I finally told them the whole truth, and while it was difficult, they understood. Our relationship began to heal. My life, once derailed, was now my own again. The book I was writing was no longer about him. It was about the resilience of truth. It was about the power of a single voice to hold the powerful accountable. Sometimes, late at night, I would sit in my apartment, a new one which I'd bought with the rest of my book advance, and look at the city lights. I felt no lingering anger towards Julian, no bitterness. There was only a quiet, profound sense of peace. He had left me with a crushing debt and a broken heart, but in doing so, he had forced me to discover a strength I never knew I had. He had called me naive, and perhaps I was. But I had learned that true strength isn't about never being a fool, it's about what you do after you've been fooled. I had taken the mess he made and used it to build a better life. A life built not on lies or charm, but on the solid, unshakable foundation of the truth.